What does it mean for a video game character to be strong? We could think that strength comes from physical fitness. You do not wish to mess around with characters like Doomguy or BJ Blazkowicz. What does it mean for a video game character to be heroic? Chivalry surely comes from heroes that fight for the greater good, never declining help to people in need like Link and Geralt. What does it mean for a video game character to be human? It means to feel all emotions and not to act robotically under blind commands, to seek happiness above all. Many are the female and male protagonists in the gaming world that have left their mark and inspired countless players across the globe. Some of them got to create and guide ourselves, and some others had paths already determined by destiny. Everyone has their own idol, their favorites, and I invite you to reflect upon who that character may be. For me, the answer to this question is already in the title of this video. My favorite protagonist in gaming is the legendary Kazuma Kiryu from the Yakuza franchise. The reasons are many, the entire duration of this video in fact, but to keep this video condensed, I'll focus on what makes Kiryu a complex and virtuous character by avoiding major spoilers of any of the games where he appears. Kiryu's complexities are many, but we have to start from somewhere, so first things first, let us roll the intro. To start my analysis, I need to ask you one simple question. What is the difference between a hero and a villain? A bit of a silly question, isn't it? A hero fights for good, and a villain fights for evil. As easy as that. But let me ask you a follow-up question. When we are playing video games, are we playing as heroes or villains? I will answer that question later. First, I would like to introduce to you, if you do not already know him, the legendary Dragon of Dojima, Kazuma Kiryu. He's the protagonist of the Yakuza, now known as the Like a Dragon franchise, and his story is quite an odyssey, one that spans a whole video game series and a half that is still pumping out new games every 2 years or so. His background, however, is well defined. He started off his journey as a member of the Japanese organized criminal syndicate, better known as the Yakuza, or Yakuza, whatever pronunciation you like best. Most of the games are set in Kamurocho, the red light district of Tokyo, where the Japanese mafia runs wild and is often the battleground of gang wars. I will not dive into what he does specifically in each of the 7 games of the series I've played, but to keep it broad, he often fights antagonists that threaten the stability between Yakuza families all across Japan, from Okinawa to Osaka to Sapporo. He also fights to protect the people who he cares about. In all of the games except the prequel Yakuza 0, he often fights to protect Haruka, an orphan girl he treats like a daughter. The premise of this character is interesting, but certainly not unique. We've played other criminal stories where the protagonist is part of a criminal organization but is still somewhat of a hero. Think of a game like Mafia 3. Lincoln Clay might be a criminal, but he's trying to stop Sal Marcano, who is a bigger criminal than him, and a similar tale goes for the other 2 games of that trilogy. In fact, let me go back to that question from earlier. When we are playing video games, are we playing as heroes or villains? In some games like Dragon Quest, we are quite literally called the hero, and in Mafia we are criminals, hence villains? The line between heroes and villains in games is very blurry, and many are the game protagonists that do not bother walking in the fog. Good guys are good just because, and bad guys are fighting even worse guys, so does it even matter? Many would answer not really, but Kiryu is a different story. You see, Kazuma is a very unique protagonist. He's ultimately a hero since he fights for the good of others, but to achieve such an ultimate goal, he will fight whomever crosses his path. Yakuza is a beat-em up in the most literal sense possible. Kiryu will not hold punches, and even if canonically he never kills anyone, he does not show mercy. I'm no black belt master, but even I can recognize this man break bones like he steps on fragile autumn leaves. But instead of ignoring this contradiction, Kiryu is well aware of who he is, of his past, of the path he took in life, and rather than to reject his criminal background, he embraces it to achieve what many of us would deem just. He does not vie for power, but fights wrongdoing with fists and kicks, and Kiryu is aware of this. He doesn't call himself a saint, nor he pretends to be one. But what is this greater good he fights for? As I stated, in the main storyline he usually protects himself and loved ones, but when roaming around the streets, he's willing to help pretty much anyone who is in need. The Yakuza franchise is filled with thousands of sub-stories ranging from silly to serious, where Kiryu finds himself in all sorts of situations with all sorts of people. And while most of these sub-stories eventually lead to a fistfight to be completed, Kiryu truly cares about helping strangers to overcome their difficulties. And here is where we dive in truly into Kiryu's persona. Despite Kazuma's background, he is noble in his intentions and always tries to help anyone as much as possible within his capabilities. He will listen to the most convoluted, messed up situations people find themselves into, and rather than to judge them, he cares to give everyone good advice, even the people he sends to the hospital. Most traditional heroes in games help others, but how often are these heroes truly motivated by pure altruism? Think of it this way. In a game like Pokemon, the protagonist will always eventually fight off the baddies to save the world or whatever, but does the character really care about it? If Pokemon games allow the player to carry on with gyms and reach the Pokemon League without interruptions, would they stop their own journey to do this sideshow? Sure, Yakuza is not the only game with side quests where the player can decide to be good, far from it, but Kiryu is one of the very few that I truly see invested in all of the sub-stories he's involved in. And ironically enough, most of these sub-stories involve everyday struggles. A cat cafe that has no cats that needs your help to find some, an amatorial baseball team that is struggling and needs a good team leader, a student studying for an upcoming exam, a journalist that is searching the latest scoop, and so on. Unlike many other video game heroes, we not only see Kiryu fighting big shots to save his community, but we see him fighting to solve simple problems. Sure, many do result in brawls, but still, we observe virtue in all of this. He's not completing quests like bring this case of oranges to the other side of the world, but rather help people to overcome their insecurities or make them understand their wrongdoings. At the end of every sub-story, you may not have changed the world, but you did change the world to someone who was seeking change. Kiryu always held firm high values, from when he was in his mid-20s in Yakuza 0 to when he was almost 50 in Yakuza 6 The Song of Life. He knew what the Yakuza was when joining it, of course, but he saw the pure side of it, what it could be under the right guidance. Even when he leaves the Yakuza, he respects the role it can have in bringing stability between the various criminals roaming the land. His reasoning is basically the following: better to have them organized and upheld samurai honor-style lives rather than to have anarchy on the streets and thus involve civilians. It is not easy for him to live with this contradiction, to live with his past tattooed on his back, but rather than to drown and to drag others in his internal conflict, he decides to aim towards improving the life of others that may have otherwise gone towards his same past. He believes in the values the Yakuza taught him, but wishes to apply them in another way. But do not get the wrong impression. Kiryu is not an old sensei master, in fact quite the opposite. Across all games he's in, he lives life at its fullest. He goes out to eat and drink, he sings karaoke every once in a while, he goes for bowling, plays baseball, hanafuda koikoi, darts, arcades, golfs, drives, goes to the gym, and much more, perhaps too much to list in this video. Unlike other video game characters, Kiryu lives within the gaming world. He breathes the fresh air and roams below the city lights. It is not often that we see a video game protagonist to truly live in this common way. We as players get to experience a vast range of Kiryu's feelings. We get to see him happy when hitting a home run, angry when he's threatened, sad when something bad happens to somebody he cares about. We as players get to know Kiryu on a more human level, not only as the digital avatar we can control, but as the protagonist of a well-elaborated odyssey, one that has duties to attend but also free time to spend. But going back to Kiryu as a character, what makes him the perfect protagonist? We already established that Kiryu is a nice dude that is willing to help anyone despite his criminal record, but for a video game character to have such a title, the perfect protagonist, a character needs more than that. It needs to inspire us. Well, many are the characters that I consider to be great, but only one was able to inspire me, and of course, you already know his name. Kazuma Kiryu is, in my opinion, the best representation of what a good person can be. This statement can sound either a bit too vague or too big for what is ultimately a character in a set of video games, but hear me out. When we think of good characters, we often think of men and women that help others and try to make the world a better place. Seems fair enough, but as I stated in my example with Pokemon earlier, good cannot come just because, otherwise it's empty, meaningless, just a way for a writer to let the player feel reassured that everything is going well. But goodness does not come from nowhere, it's not abstract nor does it take no effort to achieve. Love requires trust, devotion requires patience, integrity requires consistency, happiness requires sacrifice. We shall never make the mistake to underestimate how much effort it goes behind goodness just because it takes much less effort to sway to darkness. It is easy to refuse help, it is easy to ignore, it is easy to turn the other cheek, but it takes a real hero to combat for what is just. Kiryu may be too humble to admit it, but he truly acts according to values some would deem bigger than him. In the various plots he's placed in, he never chooses the easy way out, to run away from the problems in order to live a happy life, but rather works hard to confront them, to make the world surrounding him a better place. More often than not in Yakuza games, Kiryu does not wish to get involved with some convoluted Yakuza power grab war, but rather just to live a peaceful life, one that can provide for Haruka and others he cares about, yet there are external factors that drag him into them, and even when he is given the option to give up, to ignore injustice and only to think about his own good, he does not. He pushes towards and faces whatever potential menace there is. Kazuma may have a tough guy look, but the values he most cherishes are love, compassion, patience, authenticity, wisdom, and even humor, all values showcased in the main story and in the subs. When things take a bad turn, he's able to stand up not because he has no feelings, but because his strength is derived from them. He will do whatever it takes to seek happiness. And since the player lives with the character when they play, the player will feel the highest of highs and lowest of lows. This relationship between the character and the player gives Kiryu a three-dimensional layer only few can claim to have. He is more than just a character written for a story, but he is the story. He is Yakuza. The franchise later introduced more playable characters such as Akiyama and Mashima, awesome protagonists in their own right that deserve dedicated videos, but the OG, the character that started it all, remains him, Kazuma Kiryu. Kiryu has lived through it all, and yet he perfectly demonstrates that to be a hero, being good is not enough. To be virtuous, one does not need to passively act as a hero, but to proactively be one, an actor of good that rose from evil. When I play video games, I always try to mold the protagonist to myself, to make him or her act as I would, as I deem to be right. Yet Kiryu is perhaps the only protagonist that did the opposite, made me think of my own morality and what I should do to be a better person. The praises I have for the Dragon of Dojima are endless, but can be summarized into a brief statement. Kazuma Kiryu is the perfect protagonist. I don't know if you recall, but I started this video by asking 3 questions. What makes a video game character strong, heroic, and human? Kiryu is not the sole protagonist that can fit within these 3 categories, but it is the one that I know that does it the best. Kiryu is perhaps the best character I had the pleasure to play as in various video games, and I do not know if this singular video can do him justice. Kiryu is an extremely well designed character, one that holds true to his moral compass, whatever the situation. We got to know Kazuma both in serious plots and in silly side quests, in deadly fights and in fun minigames, in 7 and more games that span so many years of his life. I respect Kiryu, and I hope after my essay I paid him the right tribute. Arigato, Kiryu-san. If you made it this far, I wanted to thank you one too many Kiryu-chan times for watching today's video. I do not often write videos about single games, let alone single characters, but this time I truly wanted to pay homage to what I can only describe as my favorite video game protagonist, I hope you enjoyed this slightly different format, and do let me know what video game characters you deeply respect and why, but do keep it spoiler free. As always, I wish you a wonderful day, and until next time, arrivederci.